Writing a main character for a TV show can be a bit of a balancing act. After all, they've got to be normal and relatable enough to appeal to a large potential audience, but complicated enough to make the show interesting. I mean, look at Adam Blompier. When he arrives at work in his solid gold helicopter and has eaten his breakfast of raw condor eggs and champagne, he can deliver a message to the common man, and that's why we love him, because he's totally normal. With so many factors in play, it's no wonder that sometimes things just don't work out. But let me be clear, this list is in no way saying that the TV shows featured on here are bad, but that the supplementary characters in said shows have far more to offer than the main character. We're not saying that the shows needed to be redone without the main character at all, and are very aware that the show wouldn't even be in existence without the lead, but just think of this as a more what-if scenario. With this in mind, I'm Jules from Whatculture.com, and these are 9 TV shows that chose the wrong main character. Number 9. Iron Fist, Danny Rand. Bucking the trend of Marvel's incredible Netflix output, Iron Fist debuted to decidedly lukewarm reactions. While opinion on the show has been mixed, one of the things that the critics agree on is that Iron Fist himself is a pretty bland protagonist. The problem is that we never really get to see the trials Danny has to go through to become the Iron Fist. That and the fights themselves look a bit like he's phoning in those punches. Instead, a show centered around Colleen Wing would be amazing. She's a down-to-earth samurai who balances fighting ninjas while trying to run a struggling dojo. She's also responsible for some of the show's best fight scenes, including a steel cage brawl against multiple opponents and a rain-soaked showdown against the hand assassin Bakuto. Again, totally aware that this show is called Iron Fist, but still, this sidekick is almost eclipsing the living weapon. Number 8. Dexter, Dexter Morgan. So let's be clear, Dexter is the right protagonist, or to be more specific, he was. The first few seasons were carried by the weight of his character, and it was a tasty meatball bloodbath. The problem comes with character development. When your main character is a serial killer who doesn't feel emotions, there isn't much room for development. While the show did try to push Dexter into becoming more air quotes normal, it stripped away everything that made him so likable in the first place. But what if he snapped and the show then switched over to Dexter's sister Deb, hunting him down and dealing with the conflicting loyalties of her family and her job? It would have provided a rolling climax of emotion between the two and would have served to protect Dexter's character by allowing him to be absolutely mental. Number 7. Heroes, Peter Petrelli. So, the original plan for Heroes was that it would have a high cast turnover, with most characters only sticking around for one single season. However, when season 1 proved to be such a massive success, the showrunners changed their minds and decided to keep most of the main cast. Unfortunately, that really didn't gel well with the writing. Most of the show's characters had been written around a specific arc that was wrapped up in the final episode. Over the rest of the series, new ways had to be found to work them back into the plot, and as you can imagine, this caused a fair few dud stories and felt more forced than one of my puns. You're welcome. Peter Petrelli was the worst offender, as his ability of all the powers meant that he was pulled into loads of day-saving stories. So who should have replaced him? No one. The idea of a rotating cast could have been much more refreshing, and it would have forced writers to close arcs succinctly and even mitigate weak seasons by bringing in a fresh cast for the next. Number 6. Happy Days, Richie Cunningham. When Happy Days began, believe it or not, Richie was the main star. The show focused on his attempts to pick up girls and being more American than a gun baked into an apple and eagle pie served with a slice of wool. The problem was this guy, the Fonz. He was just so much cooler than this limp lead, and the show writers even recognized this, pushing Fonz to the moon and giving him a much bigger title credit and also moving him into the main character's house. The show was obviously huge, but if it had started with the Fonz, it could have been potentially even bigger. Number 5. Malcolm in the Middle, Malcolm. Like a lot of comedy shows, Malcolm in the Middle suffered from having a main character who came across as a bit bland. Malcolm was his show's perpetual straight man, always reacting to situations with either an incredulous stare or a sarcastic comment. The problem is that this made him pretty hard to like compared to the more interesting members of the cast, and let's face it, when he moved from child into teen, he became even harder to enjoy. Then there was Hal. This deranged dad was possibly one of the greatest comedy characters of the era. All of his stories ventured into the bizarre and as a result were utterly compelling. It was like we were stepping outside of reality and into his own mind whenever the show focused on him, and as a result would have been a much more enjoyable character to center on. Number 4. Arrow, Oliver Queen. The best thing about Arrow is that it's been a tale of how Oliver Queen went from being a rich brat to ultra-hard vigilante. It's mostly been told through flashbacks, and as a result we're left with a current-day Oliver who's competent and able to hang with even the baddest of villains. But hold on, surely by doing that they've missed a bit of the fun. Surely the more obvious storytelling would be him slowly growing to become the Green Arrow and more time spent on his exile and training. That way it would help the show stay fresh rather than a rinse and repeat formula that the series is now moving towards. The show's even demonstrated how this can be done with Arsenal and even Black Canary, as we've seen them grow and transform into crime fighters from ordinary people, which has provided substantially satisfying character arcs. So in essence, this entry isn't the wrong person, but maybe the the wrong point in their lives. Still, it's a fucking great show though. Number 3, Orange is the New Black, Piper Chapman. This is an example of an exceptional show made simply great by its insistence on holding on to the past. What I mean by this is that Piper definitely should have left the show by now, as she's pulling the far superior characters around her down. She'd already made enough of an impact in the first 3 seasons to have been remembered, but by overstaying her welcome, the writers have now crafted her this bizarre badass identity which is very, very ridiculous. Again, she's not a bad character as such and has helped audiences adjust to life behind bars, but her journey is done by now and we should move on to literally anyone else in order to make the show feel fresh again. Number 2, The Walking Dead, Rick Grimes. Okay, so this entry is obviously going to be inflammatory as there's nothing wrong with Rick. Well, there's a lot wrong with him, but as a character he is okay. But as with Piper, we've seen him adjust to the world of the zombies, and now the show runs the risk of making his development stagnate as he can only go so crazy. So what if instead of following Rick on his grime time escapades, that the show shifted to focus on another character and made Rick the baddie? Audience reaction would suggest that Daryl would be a good fit, but in his standalone adventures he's a bit too blank to carry a show. Carl could be a good choice if you wanted to keep it in the family as it were, but either way it would be fantastic to see Rick slip into the psychotic role he's been circling for the last 3 seasons. The comics and the TV show have already parted ways, and Kirkman has already stated that endings to both will be different, so why not have Rick go down in a blaze of betrayal and body bits? And number 1, The Big Bang Theory, everyone. Everyone in this show is terrible. No, really, all they do in the later seasons is insult each other. They barely even resemble friends. Do you get that joke? You could say that they barely resemble friends. Do you get that joke? Yeah, you're welcome. It's all descended into stereotypes and all the characters are looking very flat. So what if instead the show focused on Stuart, the kind-hearted but depressed owner of the comic book shop? He's already proved his chops when Howard was on the International Space Station, so why the chuff not? His positive traits would even help balance out the rather negative vibes the rest of the crew are giving off. So please, make Stuart great again. And that's our list. Got any more characters who don't have the chops? Well, let me know about them in the comments section below. And why not swing by whatculture.com for more news and daily articles like this every goddamn day. As always, I've been Jules for Whatculture. You can follow us here and me personally here on Twitter at RetroJ with a 0, and I will speak to you soon.